Welcome back. Yeah, well, ANC presidential hopeful Cyril Ramaphosa has chosen Science and Technology Minister Naledi Pandor as his running mate for the ANC leadership. Ramaphosa has also named several other senior party members to round up his top six.
Well, ENCA reporter, as you can see, Xoli Mgambi has been following the story. He joins us in studio. We're also going to get some analysis from political analyst Lesiba Tefo from our Pretoria studios. Prof, since you're there, let me start with you first. Some are saying that this was very surprising to hear Naledi Pandor make the cut as Cyril Ramaphosa's deputy. What do you reckon?
Yes, I was also surprised. Surprised because it is not the Naledi Pandor of yesteryear. The Naledi Pandor who commanded immense moral authority in the past. This is a woman out of political expediency, chose to be quiet when the likes of Madala Rodledge, Ronnie Casrels, Koza, and many others like Hanekom and so on, who stood up to say and spoke truth to power. She was quiet, and many asked ourselves, where is she? Why would she be so quiet when so much rot is happening to the organization and to the country as such? So I am pleasantly surprised in that sense of the word. And I'm also asking myself, if to some extent, wouldn't she be a little costly for Ramaphosa? I would have thought and hoped that they would find it within themselves to convince Lindiwe Sisulu to be the running mate. Although, unfortunately, in the past few weeks, she too put a foot in her mouth, in the sense, questioning the credentials of Gwedeman Tache and many other things. But still, I would say she's less damaged goods in my own assessment than Naledi Pandor, who I think expediently she chose to be quiet when she stood up and by virtue of her office and age led the troop from the front.
Xoli Mgambi is in studio with us as well for some analysis. Xoli, the prof there, even laughing as he answered that question. Naledi Pandor, in many respects, a very surprising choice by Deputy President Ramaphosa.
Very surprising choice, Michelle, and quite interesting the remarks of the professor there. Perhaps let me start with what the professor was saying, because the Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa, as he was announcing here, apparently he then went to hospital because there had been a tent had collapsed, and supporters who were there to support or to give support at the rally that he was addressing in Limpopo, the tent fell on them, and so he then was questioned by the media in hospital as to why this choice of Naledi Pandor. So apparently he's described her as hardworking and principled, and that she has led with distinction in the cabinet. Remember, she started serving in cabinet as far back as 2004, serving under the former president Thabo Mbeki. And so Ramaphosa describes her as being without blemish. And Michelle, she's also political royalty because her grandfather, remember, is Professor Z.K. Matthews, the late. And of course, her father is also an anti-apartheid activist, but who was, interestingly, a member of the Inkatha Freedom Party. Her father is Joe Matthews, who passed on, I think, in August of 2010. But importantly, Michelle, let me go back to what Professor Tefo is saying, and that is that Naledi Pandor, he's quite right in that she has stayed silent on some of the most controversial issues. If we move forward to President Jacob Zuma's administration in Parliament, who can forget her? Because she was among those, by the way, who stood up and defended the president when it came to the issue of Nkandla.
I see the prof nodding vehemently here. Indeed. Behind you. Yeah.
So it's quite interesting that he says that about her, but perhaps the prof can also expand further, because also, if I remember correctly, Michelle, she also would have been among those who stood up when the Guptas first landed at the Waterkloof Air Force Base. She was among those who again defended the ANC in Parliament on the Nkandla issue. Let me be clear so that we're not taken to task here, Michelle. In Parliament, they stood up. She stood up among those who were defending the record of the ANC in government. But the issue of discussion at that time was the issue of Nkandla.
All right, I understand that we have Ongama Mtimka as well joining us via Skype. So, Prof. Lesiba, just hold on for us for a bit. Ongama, tell me this. I know that the Professor and Koli say that it's not a very good idea for Naledi Pandor to be Cyril Ramaphosa's deputy because she's been so silent on corruption, because she's been a backer of President Jacob Zuma in the past. But do you think the fact that she's been laying low and not being so vocal could work in her favor or in Cyril Ramaphosa's favor?
Well, I think what has been said actually can be said about everybody who is running for office, save for Gwede Mantashe, who has not been in government recently. Even Cyril Ramaphosa himself, in fact, can, be tied with the same rope in this instance, as far as support for Jacob Zuma and his presidency is concerned. I think for me, where I would agree with the colleagues is perhaps maybe from a political clout point of view. I'm not sure. I mean, she's an experienced ANC person who's worked in government for a long time. But in terms of having a particular constituency that is known to be supportive of her, I'm not sure if the Ramaphosa campaign will be gaining much by way of that. But where it's important, because remember, the ANC, those who are the tactics now have got to do with those inside the ANC winning the conference in December. And I think if you look at below the deputy president in terms of the slate that has been announced, you can see that those people are bringing constituencies. Paul Mashatile, Gwede Mantashe, as well as everybody else that has been named. So that's where he gets constituencies. Maybe in terms of his tactics going forward, what he wants to do is to bring certainty among his own campaign ranks, so that at least that there's finality in terms of who's likely to be in and who's likely to be out. And that's important in terms of where the campaign is now, because they may be saying they don't want to gain any more constituencies by way of new provinces or new constituencies, but they want to deepen. The support that they have in process that they have currently.
All right, well, back in studio, Koli Mgambi, let's ask you this. How does it work now from a logistics point of view? Because most branches, we believe, nominated Cyril Ramaphosa with the understanding that Lindiwe Sisulu was tipped to be his deputy. Is that true, and how would it work then?
Well, that has been the talk, Michelle. But remember, I think as the professor was saying, the one in Pretoria, that he would have expected that Lindiwe Sisulu be brought in or perhaps be convinced within ANC processes to say, do away with your campaign to lead the party, rather go and be a deputy of Cyril Ramaphosa as his deputy. But importantly here, Michelle, the deputy president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, has been under pressure to name a female running mate, partly because of this ticket of a female person that actually is now ripe to lead the party. And we know who his contender is, and that is Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who comes with her own credentials. But the professor has already mentioned, Lindiwe Sisulu has put her foot in it, questioning the credentials of Gwede Mantashe, saying that where were you during the struggle when Gwede Mantashe had actually suggested at some point via social media that the ANC president would have to explain to ANC delegates why he is not handing over to his deputy, who's Cyril Ramaphosa. Otherwise, the ANC is going to fall into chaos. But also importantly here, Michelle, quite interesting that the deputy president has taken this step. And very, very interestingly, I watched yesterday in the afternoon, the president of the ANC was addressing Inkageso, saying that the history of the ANC, or the tradition and culture of the ANC, is that you do not announce yourself as a person who's going to lead the party. You allow the ANC to choose you, to point to you, to say, lead us, comrade. But he says, well, times have changed, and so if that is the practice now, or if that is to be the practice now, therefore people must not just vote for you because you are so-and-so's friend. Tell us why we think, or why you think you are capable to lead this party. So very interesting that the Deputy President has actually chosen to do this, because I think it's actually the first in the ANC. I don't think he's ever done this. If it is done within the confines of the party. So very, very interesting indeed. And of course, I think the question that you've put to me, I wonder how this now is going to sit with Lindiwe Sisulu, but she's been very, very forthright that she is a leader of the ANC in her own right, and she's not about to hand over and say, I'm going to forgo my campaign and hand over to a male candidate. She believes that she can be a leader of the ANC.
Well, it's a season of firsts for the governing party, isn't it? Some interesting times we're in at the moment in the run-up to the elective conference.
Let's talk more about these interesting times and the candidates, the other candidates listed, Prof. Tefu. Gwede Mantashe is put down as the chairperson of the ANC, and then obviously a controversial figure, some would argue, in KwaZulu-Natal, Senzo Mchunu, one of the people there. He's of course lost favor with some in that province, and Cyril Ramaphosa seems to be capitalizing on that because he still has supporters in KwaZulu-Natal.
Well, I've learned in the past, especially from the apartheid regime, that you divide and rule. And it did work for them. And I suspect even in this instance, this strategy is likely to work for Ramaphosa. What he doesn't need is a united front in KwaZulu-Natal. Because if it unites, it would probably unite in favor of Nkosazana. But to keep the wedge between the two parties, with Senzo being who he is, because still there is a sizable chunk that feels he has been betrayed, he has been pushed under the bus by those who had already set their eyes on Nkosazana. So there is immense sympathy in his favor, and he also has political clout of his own. But behind him, I think there is Bheki Cele. Today, behind him, there is a Blatant Zimande. So Senzo comes up with a sizable chunk of support and sympathy, and is very likely to work in their favor. Ramaphosa doesn't need 50% in KwaZulu-Natal. All he needs is at least 30%. That would still be enough, because the history of the ANC is on his side. Practice, tradition and custom is on his side. And on the ground, the figures as they unfold, including Limpopo, they seem to say, yes, you are almost a juggernaut. You are en route to the State House, if not to the presidency of the African National Congress.
All right, thank you so much for your time and insight. We do appreciate it. That was Professor Lesiba Tefu, of course, joining us from our Pretoria studios, but the conversation's not over just yet.
Yeah, before we let you go, Xoli Mgambi, in light of what's making headlines today, still for the umpteenth day running, Jacques Pauw's book, The President's Keepers. 6 weeks or so to go until the elective conference. Have you ever seen this type of environment in the run-up to an elective conference, where the president himself is accused of being in bed with gangsters in Cape Town, in the Western Cape, being embroiled with people from gang bosses from the underworld around South Africa? I mean, have you seen a time like this in South Africa?
It's very interesting times, Michelle. The president, Jacob Zuma, is under immense pressure himself. And I suspect there might be those who are going to say the reason he is addressing ANC forums, because yesterday, very interestingly, he was supposed to be delivering a memorial lecture, the OR Tambo Memorial Lecture in Kagiso. And he, in his own words, says, I've decided to forgo that. I will talk about OR some other time. I'm going to talk about the issues that currently plague the party. And of course, then he goes off and attacks those that he views, I guess, as being anti-Jacob Zuma, or also seem to question his leadership style. And also, you know, going off and saying the name of OR Tambo has actually been used factionally to attack other comrades. So the president is under immense pressure, Michelle. The book says that he's been engaged in acts of corruption whilst he is head of government. Issues of tax evasion are also there. The president is under immense pressure. But the question is here, Michelle, who can actually hold the president to account when institutions of state that are supposed to be going after such practices have completely been blunted? You think here of the NPA, you think here of the Hawks. Look at Parliament. Yesterday on the Politburo, we were discussing the issue of whether or not the executive that is led by President Jacob Zuma still has respect for that Parliament, or whether or not Parliament itself is actually the reason, is enabling this kind of behavior, that when members of the executive go to Parliament to account, they actually filibuster there, and they're allowed to do so because there doesn't seem to be strong leadership from whoever the presiding officer is. So indeed, you're quite right, the president is under pressure. Whether we've been here before, Michelle, perhaps some would say, yes, maybe we have been here, because in the lead up to him being elected president in Polokwane in 2007, we knew that he went there under a cloud. We knew as well that when he was elected president in Polokwane, he could not immediately become president when he would take over the reins in government in 2009, until after, of course, the cloud of being under corruption, or being alleged to be corrupt, and whether those would have been ventilated in court. And so eventually we saw Mokotedi Mshe dropping those charges against him, controversially so, and we now know what the state of play is in regard to that particular decision. So it's very interesting times indeed.
Well, thanks very much for that analysis. Our reporter Xoli Mgambi joining us there in studio, along with our guests around the country. Thanks very much to all of them for taking the time to talk.